focusing on the importance of donor relations. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Lynne Wester. Lynne is the founder and principal of the Donor Relations Group, focusing on the importance of the donor experience. And Lynne, great to have you with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So as you have gone throughout your fundraising career, why have you chosen to focus specifically on donor relations? Some people say, well, I'm the annual fund expert. I focus on major gifts. Oh, I'm all about campaigns. You have chosen donor relations. Why?
So I left a career at Walt Disney and entered higher education fundraising as the director of donor relations because there's comparable measure between guest relations that I was doing at Walt Disney World and, of course, the donor experience in higher education fundraising. So it was a natural fit for me.
Okay, Lynne, we have to ask you to elaborate on that. I'm thinking, do I get a fast pass when I'm a donor? What are you saying? What are some of those things you saw at Disney that translate to fundraising and the donor experience?
Sure. So I have a doctorate from the Disney Institute, and what you learn there in their training is that the guest experience, or in this case, the donor experience, is actually more important than the solicitation. So a lot of fundraisers spend inordinate amounts of time worrying about the ask itself, when the ask itself is less than 1% of the behavior that we actually conduct with donors. And the donor experience approximately is about 99% of the behavior. So how we make donors feel after they make their gift is actually more important than the solicitation itself. Seth Godin covers that in The Purple Cow, his book.
So again, I'm thinking I'm walking into Disney World and I'm seeing the princesses and I'm seeing Mickey and all the music and all the excitement. How does this translate to the donor experience? Because if I'm understanding you correctly, it's not just after the gift, it's preparing for the gift and during the cultivation stage, if we're talking about the donor experience. What more specifics can you provide for us, please?
Yeah, so you said as I'm walking into Disney World, but it actually begins before you even walk in. So when you purchase your vacation, it also is not just the things you see, but it's the things that you don't see. For example, it's the music you're hearing. It's the sensory of the smells that we're piping in. So in the morning, we're doing oranges and cinnamon and bright, awake things. And in the afternoon and the evening, we're doing slow down scents of vanilla and lavender, so that you'll go home quiet and calm. The music changes throughout the day. I worked in Imagineering, where we worked on the flora and the fauna for the opening of the animal kingdom in the concrete. So if you go to Asia, you'll only have flora and fauna that's found in Asia. If you go to Africa, the same. And so you have to think about that from the donor's experience. So it directly applies because there's so much involved, because fundraising is an emotional business, just like hospitality. Giving away money is not a rational decision. It's 90% emotional, 10% rational. And so we're there in creating a donor experience that will bring donors to the height of emotion, which means that their wallets, their billfolds, their DAFs, their whatever mechanism they decide to give through will open, because we've tapped into the emotion as to why they're going to make their gift.
Lynne, that is so well said. And I'm just imagining when you had that epiphany, right? All your training and experience at Disney, and then you're doing fundraising. You're like, wait a minute here. I see a lot of overlap. It's really intriguing to see. What does that mean then? Can you give us some examples in practical terms? You know, I don't think I'm starting music or using aromas when I'm meeting with my donors. Maybe I am. But, you know, what are some practical ways that donors, you know, at that front end, let's say at the start of the relationship, can be enhancing the donor relationship? And then please take us through cultivation, solicitation, and even after the gift.
Sure. So one of the best things that we can do for our donors is to be quiet and listen. And so that's one of the things that Disney does so well, is gathering data about the donor. So rather than making the conversation, so during cultivation, finding out maybe why the donor made their first ever charitable gift, what they care about, what brings them to emotion is something that's really important. And listening for the cues that donors give us. For example, we had a donor whose mother raised lilies in her garden, and she loved lilies, so that every time that donor came to an event, there were lilies at the table to remind her of her mother. So deep, meaningful, thoughtful. Disney calls it surprise and delight, or jaw-dropping moments. But it can also be something as simple as listening during the cultivation phase and hearing someone like myself say, I'm really a digital person. I make all my gifts online, and maybe sending that person a video or a postcard rather than a 4-page solicitation letter that nobody's going to read if they're a digital donor, right? Or listening to the way in which a donor gives is one of their direct corollaries to their communication preference. So if a donor writes you a check, writing them a handwritten note rather than sending them a video. So listening through channel. And then even through giving process. So one of the biggest difficulties for most donors is actually going and making a gift. It can be very difficult. We ask a lot of unnecessary questions of donors just to process their credit card. Whereas if you look at businesses that are really great at the guest experience, Apple or Disney, all I have to do is tap my watch or a wristband that you've given me, and the transaction doesn't become burdensome, and you don't need to make me jump through hoops to purchase. And then after, it's that emotional personalization. So when you ride on the Haunted Mansion now at Walt Disney World in the Magic Kingdom in Florida, at the end of the ride, 2 ghosts join your doom buggy. That's what they're called at the Haunted Mansion. And it's personalized to you. And then you get a photo that appears on your phone later that day of those 2 ghosts that have hitched a ride with you. Not, dear friend, thank you for your experience. It's, hey, Lynn, here are the guys that joined you. Remember this moment? And so you can tie it all the way through the experience.
That is just fantastic. Lynn, thank you for those colorful examples. As you do work with nonprofits, what are you seeing in terms of donor relations? You know, how would you just assess the state of donor relations in the professional fundraising field? Is this something that's happening a lot, a little? Are people curious? They want to do more? You know, just kind of what assessment do you have of the field right now in this area of donor relations?
When I started 23 years ago, it was a burgeoning practice. Only the biggest shops had a donor relations professional or 2. Now it is inextricable from most shops that we see people understand that the key to donor retention, and a lot of us are now combating really poor donor retention. Imagine if you owned a restaurant and only 2 out of 10 of your first-time customers came back. And those are our donor retention numbers right now for first-time donors, is 80% leave after their first gift. Your restaurant would close in 3 months. And so I think the shops that understand that this is a long-term sustainable way to fundraise, understand donor relations and invest heavily in it. It's 7 times cheaper to keep the donor I have giving than to go out and acquire new one. So it not only makes good sense just because that's what we know works, it also makes fiscal sense if we think about fundraising for decades and decades and hundreds of years from now. Those that understand that the way we treat people is part of that core relationship. And when we build good relationships, we get long-term donors.
And Lynn, I just want to affirm the fundraising school fully associates with that viewpoint. That again, it is less time and less money to keep our current donors, why we continually attract new donors. And we do have donors drop off. And I can tell you, we hear stories from donors who say, I am cultivated, I get the aromas, I get the experiences, I get the photo, all the things that you were talking about in the Disney context, and I make the gift. And then I don't hear from the fundraiser again after the thank you letter. And it's just human dignity to stay in touch with people, right? After they make a gift,
Bill,
let alone what it can mean for future giving. I'm sorry?
Right? You said after the thank you letter right there, right? I stand in front of audiences regularly and get to debate with them whether their donors are worth a stamp on a thank you letter or if the receipt will do. And so we are changing that culture of you know what, if you don't have the time and the resources to thank the donor, then maybe we shouldn't accept the gift, right? So you and I say the thank you letters are given, and I say the state of donor relations is that those that get it understand that, and we're still arguing with board members, we're still arguing with resources to say, if you can't afford the 70-cent stamp or an email, or if you can't make the effort to thank, then maybe we shouldn't ask again because we weren't ready for those gifts, right? So those basic steps, Penelope Burke and Cygnus Donor Research and your research, and Una Osili talks about it as well, as it's multiple touches after the gift. It's not just, okay, thanks. You need to do two things in order to get a gift again. One is thank the donor, and the second is tell them what their money did. And so many of us still haven't understood that that's a combo that's inextricable from each other. And tell me what my gift did, which is different than your gift, right?
While staying in touch in those particular tailored ways, the lily flowers for the woman who that's important to, and so on. Lynne, your last comment there also brings up an important point. Fundraisers listening to this say, yes, I get it, but I work for a CEO, or we are guided by a board that says, go on to the next gift, hit those goals. We don't have time to go back to those previous donors. What advice do you have for fundraisers in terms of trying to lead up with these messages about the importance of donor relations?
I do a lot of training for the boards and the CEOs and those that want to help us be successful in fundraising. And what I ask them to do is reflect on their own business. So many of those folks run successful businesses in their communities. And I say, so somebody buys a car from you and they never hear from you again, and they don't have a relationship with you. Where do most of your customers come from? They come from referrals from previous customers. And you teach customer service, or you're an insurance agent, or they get it for themselves, but they don't get it for a nonprofit. So we're businesses. We're just a different classification of a business. And so that's where I think we have to remind our friends that resourcing this, and if I can't get them to understand that, then I go with a monetary. So it's 7 times cheaper for me to keep this donor giving now than it is to go get a new one. It's the same thing as when I say, please stop having fundraising events and thinking you're raising a lot of money, right? Because you're losing 40, 60 cents on the dollar every time you raise a dollar. So I think it's education, but I also think it's respect. So our board members and our CEOs need to trust us as professionals and need to understand that fundraising is a profession. That's why the Lilly School is so important. We actually have degrees and certifications. I have a master's degree in fundraising, right, from Baypath, one of your partners, right? And so people need to see that it's an actual profession, not a hobby I picked up along the way. And so hopefully as we professionalize and as we lead up to those folks using ration and also giving them experiences. So I have board members who I've had give numerous gifts to different organizations that are competitors, and then say, which one gives you the best donor experience?
And that is really indicative of how well donor relations is happening or not. And Lynne, I just want to call out, you clearly have a gift of speaking each person's language, the way you tailored that message, for example, to the board of directors consisting primarily of business people, and how you've translated your expertise from the private sector, one of the most well-known corporations at Disney, into effective fundraising donor relations. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us here on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Please know that your work is valuable, and we need you in our sector so much. So we appreciate each and everything you all do as well.
Well, you're very kind with that word of encouragement, and I would just share that right back to you, since, again, donor relations just seems to be this area that is forgotten. At the Fundraising School, we teach a 14-step fundraising process, making the ask doesn't happen until step 13, and the 14th step is stewardship, or you might hear donor relations or donor experience, these different types of phrases. And, these teachings are included in our 25 different courses at the Fundraising School that lead to 5 different certificates. We can custom design our training just for you, your nonprofit, your association, your region. And we also have quarterly webinars, these weekly podcasts, and all of our knowledge gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. Where do you go for this information? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our guest today, Lynne Wester of the Donor Relations Group, where she serves as principal and founder. Our producers today are Jennifer Boffman, Brittany Miller, and our Emmy Award winner, Mike Anthony. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.